Ronnie carried the silence of the river within her. A cold stone settled where laughter used to bloom. The day the familiar currents swallowed her Baba, the world had tilted on its axis. 13, and the weight of their small mud brick home pressed down, a tangible burden on her young frame. Dawn had painted the sky with promise the morning Baba went fishing, his familiar silhouette receding towards the water's edge. Sunset bled into night, leaving only an echoing void where his presence should have been. The villagers, their faces etched with concern, had joined her desperate vigil along the riverbanks, their calls a fragile counterpoint to Ronnie's internal screams. But the river offered no answers, its surface a placid mask over a hidden tragedy. A disquiet settled in Ronnie's heart, a certainty that Baba wouldn't simply vanish. Grief warred with a simmering anger, yet the hollow-eyed hunger of her ailing mother was a more immediate, pressing concern. Fishing was their inheritance, a skill passed down like the lines on their palms. Ronnie's childhood was a tapestry woven with memories of the riverbank, her small hand secure in Baba's rough one as he whispered tales of the water's hidden life. "The river remembers, little one," he'd murmur, his eyes mirroring the sun-dappled surface. "What we feel, what we think, sometimes, it shows us in its depths." His words, once comforting riddles, now held a chilling resonance she couldn't decipher. The river, once a shared joy, now felt like an accusation. When Ronnie, driven by necessity, tried to cast her own net in their usual spot, the other fishermen, their gazes a blend of pity and practicality, gently steered her away. "The big river is too strong for a child, Ronnie," they'd say, their voices kind but firm. A different path, a desperate gamble, began to form in her mind. The village was divided, one side embracing the familiar embrace of the wide river, the other shadowed by the looming presence of an ancient, untamed forest. Whispers, hushed and infrequent, spoke of another river hidden within the woods, a place steeped in shadow and whispered legends. Driven by her mother's weakening breaths, Ronnie packed a meager bundle one pale dawn and stepped into the forest's silent maw. Despite a lifetime spent within sight of its edge, the forest felt alien, hostile. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, painting the mossy undergrowth in shifting, spectral shadows. The snap of unseen twigs and the sudden, sharp cries of hidden creatures sent tremors of fear through her, but the image of her mother's frail face spurred her onward. Finally, through a thicket of gnarled branches, she saw it, a slender ribbon of water snaking through the gloom. A wave of relief washed over her as she knelt at the muddy bank, cupping the cool water to her parched lips. But as she looked down, her breath snagged in her throat. The reflection staring back was not her own anxious face, but the familiar, beloved silhouette of her father. "Baba!" The cry tore from her lungs. She spun around, heart pounding, but the forest remained still and silent, the only witness to her desperate hope. A trick of the light, she told herself, a cruel phantom conjured by her longing. Her hands trembled as she unfolded her fishing net. As she prepared to cast it, her worn sandals slipped on the slick mud, and she plunged into the icy water. Panic clawed at her. She thrashed, her small body struggling against the sudden shock and the lack of purchase. Just as she fought her way back to the shallow edge, a strange, insistent tug gripped her ankle. It felt like a hand, unseen beneath the murky surface, pulling her back into the depths. Terror lent her a surge of adrenaline. She kicked wildly, and the unseen grip released. Gasping for breath, she scrambled onto the bank, a chilling dread coiling in her stomach. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. Then, a splash of crimson caught her eye, drifting towards her on the sluggish current. As it reached the shore, the last vestiges of her courage dissolved. It was Baba's Angavastram, the faded red cloth he always wore around his neck. How? The silent question echoed in the oppressive stillness. Trying to reason with the impossible, she told herself it could belong to anyone. She stood, her legs unsteady, and reached into her bag for bait. But when her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a jolt of pure terror shot through her. Inside lay a small, worn photograph of Baba, a picture she hadn't packed. And someone, or something, had brutally scratched out his eyes. A primal instinct screamed for her to flee. This place was wrong, defiled. She turned back to retrieve her net, the last thread of her purpose here. But the moment her fingers brushed the coarse weave, a violent tremor ran through it. For a desperate heartbeat, she thought it was teeming with fish, and she tugged with all her might. The net remained stubbornly fixed. With a sickening lurch, it finally yielded, and what emerged from the dark water was a nightmare made real. Entangled in the net, bloated and pale, was the lifeless form of her father. His familiar face, contorted in a silent scream, stared blankly up at the filtered sunlight. Ronnie's breath hitched, a strangled sob escaping her lips. Then, a subtle shift in the air behind her made the fine hairs on her arms rise. The feeling of an unseen presence intensified, a cold, malevolent energy swirling around her. But she couldn't leave Baba here, alone in this dreadful place. With a strength born of utter desperation, she began to drag his waterlogged body from the river. But when he was fully on the bank, a fresh wave of horror crashed over her. Half of his body was gone, a ragged, brutal tear hinting at a monstrous hunger. Before the shock could fully register, the water before her churned violently. From the murky depths rose a figure that would forever haunt the edges of her sanity. A woman, her hair a tangled mass of dripping moss, her teeth long and pointed like shards of bone. Her skin was scarred and burned, and blood smeared her gaunt face. She smiled, a chilling, predatory curve of her lips, and as she did, the clear water of the river began to bleed, turning a viscous, terrifying red. Ronnie screamed, a sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the ancient forest. She turned and ran, blindly, not daring to look back, the image of the monstrous woman and the crimson river branded onto her soul. She never returned to the forest, never spoke of the horrors she witnessed. The villagers, seeing only a traumatized child, attributed her silence to grief and a vivid imagination. But Ronnie knew the truth. She knew that the river hidden in the forest held a dark hunger that had claimed her father, and perhaps, generations before him. The shock remained, a constant shadow lengthening her days. Ronnie now pushed a small wooden cart through the village, selling the meager vegetables she could grow, her small hands roughened by a different kind of toil. But in the long, quiet nights, the Red River and the terrifying smile would return, stealing her sleep and forever reminding her of the day the forest river had given back what the other river had taken, and the unspeakable price she had paid for its secrets.